welcome you all to Trek Wars. So today on Trek Wars, we'll be taking a look at the different modularity and different versions of the Miranda Class starships. Now this is the most successful line of starship the Federation has ever produced. So we'll be taking a look at 4 common variants of the starship. We'll be looking at a deep space sensory system. We'll be looking at long-range scanners. We'll look at a standard, and we'll look at the military version of the Miranda Class. So the USS Lantree NCC-1837 was a Miranda Class starship that was used at least in the 2290s through the 2365. Miranda Class vessels were normally assigned to scientific missions or patrol duties, but by the mid-24th century their aging designing meant that many had been removed from frontline service and transferred to less demanding tasks. The Lantree, for an example, had become a Class 6 supply ship transferring cargo, parts, and material to colonies, space stations, and other ships. In 2365, it was known that the Lantree operated mainly in Sector Gamma 7 and had a crew complement of just 26, where earlier vessels of this class normally operated with 200 personnel. The Miranda Class is 243 meters long. The ship is capable of warp 9.2 and can hold this up to 12 hours. The ship is classified as a Class 3 defense armaments, including 6 Type 7 phaser emitters on the saucer and 2 aft phaser emitters positioned below the impulse engines, plus a photon torpedo launcher. Some additional information about the ship is the ship usually carries around 200 people, but this ship has been automated to only need 26. So this ship is pretty advanced when it comes to automation, and then the ship is pretty fast. So when you take a look at the ship, you find out that it's capable of 9.2, which is pretty standard, but it can maintain this warp speed for 12 hours. That's actually pretty fast for a ship of this type, and that's pretty significant. So these ships may not have great offensive capabilities, but they've been heavily modified to have advanced sensory systems. They also have, pretty modern laboratories, and there's a lot of internal structures that have been modified with this ship, making it honestly pretty advanced for a ship of its size and time period. Okay, so now let's talk about its weapons and its offensive and defensive capabilities. So the shields are 390,000. It's nothing very relevant. Its hull value is 173,000. It's got a defense of 563. Has an attack value of 104,200. So right off the bat, its hull is significantly weaker than what we have seen with other Federation starships of the same class. So they're not paying any really attention to its offensive and defensive capabilities, but it's focusing on its internal structures. Alright, for those who are curious about the weapons themselves, so it's going to have 14 phaser bulbs on it, which are going to be Type 7. Power level is 2,812, so it's not very powerful at all. It's going to have a photon torpedo tube, which is 65,000. Now, one thing that's really interesting about the ship is most Federation starships have, at minimum, 2 photon torpedo tubes. That seems to be the standard for Starfleet, but for some reason, the standard Miranda Class with no additional pods only has 1 photon torpedo tube, which is really unusual. So that photon torpedo tube, I'm going to assume is probably an older variant and would probably only carry like old torpedoes of the 65,000 magnitude, which would be the same as seen in the Kirk era. But I could be wrong, and it could be using a newer photon torpedo tube, which is very possible because it does have a lot of internal modifications, but since they didn't bother to upgrade the phasers, I highly doubt it. So next, we'll be taking a look at Captain Sisko's old ship, the USS Saratoga, NCC-31911. Some of the Miranda Class vessels were equipped with a weapons robar that was fitted above and rear section of the saucer, and it carried an additional phaser and torpedo launcher. The Saratoga did not feature this robar and just had a standard number of phasers and torpedo launchers. This included 6 Type 7 phaser emitters, 3 mounted on top of the saucer and 3 below, including one that was situated on the sensor dome. There were also two phaser emitters located just below the impulse engines at the rear. The Saratoga had additionally cylinder sensor pods located between the port and starboard side of the saucer sections. These were not standard equipment on all Miranda Class vessels and obviously enhanced the scanning abilities of the Saratoga, providing additional scientific data. The ship top speed of warp 9.2 for short periods, but its standard cruising speed was closer to warp 6. So the internal structures of the ship are actually similar to the Constitution class starship. Alright, so the weapon systems aboard this ship are going to be identical to the previous version of the Miranda. It's got 6 dual phaser banks, it's got 2 rear pulse phasers, and it carries 1 photon torpedo tube. Now, one of the differences between this ship and the previous ship, though, is this ship does have that armor that you would see in the other variants. So this ship is stronger as far as its hull value than the previous ship. So take a look at shields are going to still be 390,000, and then it's got a hull value 285, giving it a defensive value of 675,000. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at it side by side, and you can see the difference. So you see the standard version is 173. One that's going to be doing patrol duty, that's going to be more of a combat oriented role. It's going to have a hull value of 285,000. So most of the Miranda ships are using the hull value of 285. The ones that are designated as cargo ships, they have a significantly less armor. So one of the really interesting things about this ship's warp speed is it is slightly slower than the other Miranda class. It does have the same warp speed, 9.2 at its fastest, but it can't travel for 12 hours. I don't know if this is due to the sensor pods. I speculate that it has something to do with the additional attachments that makes it not be able to hit warp speed for as long as the standard Miranda class. The ship is also heavier, and that might be another factor, is the weight. So these things are used for scientific data as well as spying on enemy targets. So if you're on the border, you have a deep space scanner that can see far into enemy space. Now this ship also will act as a secondary as a patrol ship. Now I believe that it's a patrol ship that's secondary to its scientific duties because the ship is not armed very well. Now, I do want the audience to know that there are conflicting data about the weaponry on this ship, because there is information stating that the ship does have multiple photon torpedo tubes and is using Type 9 phasers. Now, I will be honest with you, I think that this information is more accurate because those depictions and those things are said actually on screen. So one of the main reasons you can tell is, you see the phasers are the same kind of phasers that you see here. Those beam phasers are going to be Type 8 or Type 9. Type 7 phasers look very different. Type 7 phasers are like pulse phasers. They shoot pulse over and over again. Pulse, pulse, pulse. So this is why I think that they are not actually Type 7 phasers. But I'll let you decide if you think this is true or not. So I have a theory behind this. So I think the ship still has the standard 14 Type 7 phasers. I think it has 2 torpedo launchers since the captain stated so. And I think there is 1 Type 9 phaser. I think that the primary sensor dome is where the Type 9 phaser was installed. And I think the reason they did that is I think that the ship can't handle Type 9 phasers. So I believe they built the Type 9 phaser into a new grid because the old grid system just couldn't handle that much power. So let's go ahead and slow it down, and you can see what I'm talking about. You can see the dome itself is actually firing. You can see it's not firing from any of its actual normal weapon platforms. Now, what would be the reasoning for that? Simple this. So the reason we do this is pretty simple. You're going to have to build a completely new power grid system going from the warp core to the weapon. And the modern weapons that they have are too powerful for the old system. So you're going to have to completely re-engineer it to do this. So I think that this was just a technique that they used to make this ship more, because this is going to raise the ship's offensive capabilities a lot. If it just it's kind of like the Galor. How the Galor has one really powerful weapon. that's kind of what this ship is doing. It's kind of like a Galore in a way, but only not as powerful. So it's using that dome, the navigational dome, as basically a component for a high-level powerful phaser, which is maybe Type 9. Because the ship's not really designed for these high-quality weapons, but if you have an additional power core or power source and you have routing there, then you can make it happen. And I think that taking the time to do this to all 14 batteries is just too extensive for a ship that's priority is basically just, we want you to be out there and use our sensors. It's not really needing the offensive capability, but this is just a nice little, hey, you don't want to mess with this ship, it's got some firepower. So one of the strangest ships is the NCC-1941 USS Boseman. So the USS Boseman, though it looks like it has these laser towers on it, they're actually deep space scanners that are designed for mapping. So this ship is mapping systems, and that's its primary function. It has all the offensive and defensive capabilities as the ships we've seen before. It has 2 photon torpedo tubes, and then it has 14 Type 7 phasers. Now, we don't ever see this ship again, and I don't think the Federation had very many of these ships. These ships were boasting very powerful arrays and were very expensive to produce. And they were used for deep space, interstellar mapping. So when you take a look at the ship, you'll see that these sensor domes, that there are 2 on the side, 2 on the bottom, and 1 on top. So we have 5 separate sensor domes on this ship. So this ship had incredibly powerful sensors. And then what you'll notice is there is almost a box-like structure on the back of the ship that none of the other Mirandas have. Now, this is power supplies and computers and additional information and components that are working in tandem with this advanced sensory system. So this ship can literally scan 5 times better than any other ship in the fleet during its time period. Now, its primary role is obviously mapping. You don't have a ship like this that has all this technology and then go send it on supply runs. Though it could do that if necessary, and it also could defend itself, because during this time period it still was a rather well-equipped ship. But its primary function is not combat, it's not even defensive duties, it's scientific studies or mapping. So this basically is a scout ship. That is the best way I can describe this vessel. And obviously the Reliant is the combat version and the combat module of all these starships. And we'll talk about that ship right now. So the Reliant version is a modified version of this old version. You're going to get a roll bar, you get extended armor, and more weapons. So the Miranda will get a full breakdown in its own video later on, but for basically right now, you can see all the different versions of the ships that we can see. The standard version, the sensor version, the deep space scanner, mapping, scout, and we have the combat variant. Now the combat variant has every weapon that we've seen already, and it has an additional weaponry. This ship is a heavy escort frigate. Alright, like I said, this is a heavy frigate. This is designed basically just for combat. It's got 6 dual Type 7 phasers. It has 2 standard phaser Type 7s. It has 2 mega phasers and 4 photon torpedo tubes. So this starship is armed to the teeth with weapons. This is a powerful starship. I would say this ship has more firepower than even a Constitution class, though it could be argued which ship is more combat oriented. To give you an idea of how strong this ship actually is, it survived all the way up to the Dominion Wars, and it was still fighting ships in the Dominion Wars. As old as the ship was just that well armored and that well armed. Now, this video is primarily focused on all the different modules, and I will have separate videos for every single one of these ships and these ships classes with more advanced breakdown. But I wanted a breakdown or an understanding of all the different modules that the Miranda class had. I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and please subscribe and make a comment. For watching Trek Wars. If you like this material, please subscribe and make a comment. And with that being said, victory is life. So, just so you guys know, I have no idea who this person is when I was randomly looking at images. A lot of these images were coming from this person. I don't know who they are, but if you're interested in them, I guess you can just look up their name and check them out. So, JBOBROONY.